Welcome to another episode of the Tower 26 B Race Rate Podcast. I'm Jim Minsky here with Coach Gerry Rodriguez. Coach, how you doing?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
We're back, baby. We are back to
But a biz
2024.
Yeah.
When did we start? What year did we start doing this podcast? Do you have any idea?
2017-ish?
I can find out. I probably should have done my
18?
homework and looked this up. But if we go back all the way back to number one,
There were just a
2020,
handful of podcasts
2019,
then.
2018, 2017, 2016. Have I known you for this long? 2016, January 2016. 8 years. Is that 8? What's that? 8 years? 8 years we've been doing this podcast. Here's the deal. We've kind of fallen off a little bit, but we were just waiting for all of the low-hanging fruit to kind of drop off the podcast. We didn't want to get jumbled up in the mix. And now we're back, baby. The number one podcast in triathlon is back on the air.
I don't think we've fallen off. I think we made the decision a few years ago not to produce content if there's not a lot of content to go over. And my thing about at least our podcast is that I want the content to be evergreen, where if you listen to this in 2 years or 5 years, it's relevant. So the episodes that we've done, I think, with the education regarding triathlon swimming and many of the other aspects and the interviews that we haven't done a lot of interviews, but the interviews would be relevant for anyone listening at, any time in the near future. And let's define that as probably 10 years out.
Well said. See what shirt I'm wearing today? Peter Brantley, our very own Peter Brantley.
That's right.
I train in LA. He's got all, what is this one? The climb one? I think he's got all the climbs. LA
Yes.
climbs on the back of this shirt. So it's pretty cool company compared to Peter Start. He's got a good whole cycling kit side of the business and some pretty neat t-shirts. So itrainla.com, itraininla.com. You can check out Peter's stuff, but no sponsorship. It's just I decided to wear it today. People watching on Facebook Live right now might say, hey, I love that shirt. And it's funny. Let me tell you a little story about myself, because we know this podcast is all about me. Michael Middleton was riding from our house the other day.
And who is Michael Middleton?
Michael Middleton's one of our athletes, longtime athlete, very successful, was in Nice last year, Kona a few years ago. He's maybe he didn't do Kona. He'll be going to Kona this year. But he's parked in front of my house and he rode from our house. I was out there with Mason, my son, 2 years old. He's almost 2. He'll be 2 in May. And he saw Michael leave. He waved to him. So this morning when I got Mason out of the bed, I was wearing the shirt and he points to it. He says, Michael. The guy only knows like 3 words, but he points to this, says, Michael. Association.
Well, guess what? Wasn't Middleton also like a top-notch U.S. model at one point?
Oh, male model. He is the Zoolander of Tower 26.
He is the model on that. Your kid probably saw, wait a minute, who's modeling that shirt there?
Who is that guy on that bike? And yeah, good stuff. So I train in LA. I train in LA.com. Check that out. But yeah, we got a lot of stuff to cover on the show, so I'm not going to banter too long with my own hemming and hawing. What are we going to talk about in this episode of the Tower 26 podcast, Chair?
Well, always good to sort of do a refresh and remind listeners about how to help set up your year, do it properly, the details that are needed, how to, when you select your races, how to approach those races. And then, of course, there are probably a half a dozen, a little potpourri of things that have occurred in the last 6 to 8 weeks since the year has begun that I think are relevant and that we can dive into for a couple of minutes in each of those.
Yeah, because it's officially March. We want this to be obviously evergreen. So this is something we can use forever, but we want to think about, what is our year going to look like? Are we going to focus on certain races? Are we just going to jump from one race to another and just kind of perform so-so in each of those races? So when we're thinking about planning the season and where we want to really perform, we really have to put a lot of thought into it. So what's your take on this and how our athletes or these listeners should be setting up that year?
Well, for our audience, which tend to be folks who race more and have been participating in the sport, it's helpful to have your roadmap set up for the year. So you define your races, and beginners, it may be one and done, and maybe 1 or 2 events at the most. But more seasoned athletes that enjoy the process quite a bit would tend to sign up anywhere from 4 to 5 or 6 races throughout the year. But all of those races cannot be A races. So we then have to take those races and from this coach's perspective, identify which races of your, let's say you're going to do a half a dozen races this year, which of your half a dozen races, your 5, 6 races that you want to really peak for and be ready for. And it can't be all 6. So we'll pick a couple. We can call those your A races. Then we'll have some sort of supporting races, B races, and then we'll have what we call, you know, not even putting the varnish on, getting the barnacles off, C races. And your C race is going to be your first race of the year also, or it should be. It should be a race where you're kicking the dust off and the rust from the prior season. And, well, you can talk on to the detail with that, but you get the idea. It's just getting restarted again, getting
Yeah,
reintroduced for the new year.
totally. We have a lot of athletes going through that right now. They're doing half marathons, 10Ks. A couple might throw in a marathon. Not saying a marathon is not a big undertaking, but when you're a triathlete and you want to focus on performing at Ironman Texas or Morro Bay 70.3 or Santa Barbara Triathlon, the marathon kind of takes a back seat. So it's not necessarily an A race, especially if it's happening in January, February, March. So that is exactly what you're saying. But when you're looking at A races, what would you say the separation? If you plan on peaking for 2 races a year and you want to really perform at those races, what do you think the distance between those races should be?
Well, I'm certainly not a fan, Jim, as you know, of many athletes over the years, some of which we've coached, that like to race back-to-back weekends, especially Ironman races. That is not if you want longevity and want really good performances. So I've never really understood that thinking, but I know there are many athletes who chose to do that. Um, but if we were sensible about your year, at the end of the season, you should have taken time off, and you would now be restarting again, and you'd be building in carefully into your season, and you would probably set up your first A race somewhere, you know, 3 to 4 months into the season, probably 16 weeks, 20-ish weeks into the season. And then your next A race can probably be 8 to 12 weeks out from that, perhaps, or towards the end of the season, if you're going to have 2 A races in the year. But I think you need at least probably, but again, depends on the distance. So if you're on an Olympic distance, you can have a shorter duration. Those are racing Ironman races, and you want to peak for Ironman races. I think you need to have a longer duration between your races.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you look at the distance that you're racing. If you're doing an Ironman, you look 6 to 8 weeks out. You can add in a half Ironman or maybe Olympic distance. If you're focusing on a half Ironman, same thing. 5, 6, 7 weeks out, you do an Olympic distance race. Just like you said earlier, something to knock the dust off, get used to the transitions, get used to the feel of racing. So that way you go into that race where you really want to, put your eggs in that basket. And it's not the first time you're towing the line. It's not the first time you're using your equipment in a race like situation. And you get moving, you practice your execution strategy, you practice your fueling, you practice your mindset. So when you go in and you travel to a race and you pay all this money to go there and stay in a hotel if you need to, or transport your bike, you've been through the process. You know what it's like to go out there and execute on course. So I think there's a lot to be said about those build-up races, whether B or C races, going into a bigger race, as long as there's enough buffer between the two.
It's a good word, buffer, and also to your point, making some of those races a tad shorter. They can act as a part of your sharpening process as you're getting ready to perform well in your big race. In fact, last season I felt, with no inside knowledge, I don't know the gentleman other than what I see on the media, but I felt world champion Christian Blumfeld raced too frequently on too many races back to back, weekend after weekend after weekend. And I thought that his season became flabby towards the end. Performances were
Well, and
flabby.
that's kind of bring us. We're going to talk about a bunch of different topics here, but one of the things on our list to talk about is the new PTO 100 series. The PTO has this 100 series. Ironman has their new race series. There's all these different series popping up with more and more prize money. Do you think this is going to lead to a decrease in performance from a lot of these top level professionals who want to go and win everything?
I'm not close enough to the insiders and with my ear to the who's who to know what the contracts of these athletes look like and what are their, because I would presume some of your top athletes would be under contract to race. So I don't know how many races they would be required to race. especially at the PTO, I presume athletes are under contract, and there's probably a quantity of races they would need to race. I just don't know what it is. So if an athlete's going to do both PTO and Ironman, then they're going to have to be pretty careful about managing their season carefully.
So the PTO is 40 of the world's best female and male pros will battle over 8 extraordinary races around the globe, culminating in the inaugural T100 grand finale at the end of November. With 7 million on the line, plus a chance to become the first ever T100 world champion, we are redefining triathlon. That's from the PTO site.
Okay, so if there are 8 races, 7 then plus 1 the grand final, or was it 8 then plus 1 the grand final? Well, I didn't understand how that was written, but
8 extraordinary races, inaugural T100 with 7 million. I think it's 8 total.
Okay, so again, without should have done a little bit more homework. I didn't know you'd ask that question, but I'd be hard pressed to think the PTO would require athletes on the contract to race all 8. So there's probably maybe 5 races that they have to do, perhaps, and 6 at the most, I would think. So 6 events. Pick your events carefully.
But then you have the Ironmans throwing out a bunch of cash towards their series as well, and you find that especially the younger guys, they're going to want to go do everything, scrape up as much money as possible, and I don't know. There's only so much you can race and lay it on the line before you break, and poor performance starts to depreciate.
Well, big picture is the sport is blossoming now professionally, right? There's money coming in from a professional standpoint, and which will encourage more athletes to race pro. This is also obviously an Olympic year. So you will know within the first handful of months, by probably April-ish, I would think, May, athletes would be selected for their countries to race. And those who didn't make it, those Olympic distance athletes, you would likely see some of those stepping up to half Ironman races and these PTO races if they can get in. But certainly half Ironman races. I think we're going to see a very, very competitive year of racing.
Yeah,
extremely competitive year.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's excited. The pro racing's on the up and up. They're throwing a lot of money out there towards to get these pros to their events. But getting back to the original topic is what we wanted to discuss is no matter who you are, whether you just want to finish an Ironman or you want to win the PTO 100, you got to carefully think about your schedule and make sure that you're not overextending yourself. Because once you toe the line, you want to get the most out of that performance.
And I come back to Christian. I think last year, whatever went into the decision making, which I don't have any insight in knowledge on, I'm just a coach observer. Too many races back to back, I think, hurt his performances towards the end of the season. And I don't think that's how you want to wrap a season.
Exactly. And, a lot of our listeners might not know where to start. That's where you want to talk to your own coach, have faith in what their opinions are, their ideas are, and just lay out the plan accordingly with them, as opposed to someone like Christian or some other pros who might just see the money and just want to go to this and that and this and that.
Well, and he may, what we don't know is he may have obligations to do some of those races. He may have had to show up at them. There may be appearance fees and so on. So it's not a matter of picking on him, but using him as an example that when you race this frequently, here's the downside of it. I mean, look at our world greatest marathon runners. They're just running a handful of races a year. And athletes that are doing triathlon, Ironman triathlon races, they're swimming 2.5 miles, 2.4 miles, and then they're getting in and riding 112 miles, and then they're doing a marathon. How many of those should you be doing in a year?
Yeah.
This coach doesn't think too many.
The body can only take so much if you want to perform at that top level. You can be like, what's that guy's name? The Iron guy, the Iron Cowboy, and do an Ironman a day for however, but you're not going to be going 8 hours. The guy's doing them in, he did some in whatever, 30 hours or whatever it was. So, what do you want? You want performance, or you just want to check the box and get another medal? Yeah. Everybody has their own motivation, their own reasons for doing this. But one thing that they're going to have on the PTO course is the Race Ranger. They just announced this, I think it was last week. Have you heard about this Race Ranger technology?
Yeah, tell me about it. I want to get your thoughts on it.
It's an electronic monitor that monitors drafting. It monitors the draft zone, which we'll get into in a second, but just let me talk about what it is real quick. It's delivered at all the events in the same way. The timing company gives each athlete 2 devices to fit to their bike before a race. The colors that are indicated while the athlete is riding tells them how close they are to the other riders. So an orange warning light, they're in the draft zone plus 5 meters.
So this is a device to assist athletes regarding penalties for drafting on the
right,
bike.
exactly.
Okay.
So if they get an orange light, they're in the draft zone plus 5 meters, so they're safe. Blue warning, their draft zone plus 2 meters, they're still safe. And if they get a red flashing light, they are in the draft zone and they need to get out of it. So it
where are these placed?
self-governs the athletes, and there's one on the rear and there's one on the front fork, right? So then they have the one right behind on the seat post, and then one on the fork of the bike. So it monitors, how close they are on the front to another bike and how close the bike behind them is. So so this is interesting, and I like this technology, because here's what we're finding with a lot of these races now is these packs coming out of the swim, they get 30, 40 guys, right? And they get on the bike and it's just one big peloton, not necessarily a peloton, but it's really tight draft zone, right? They're really pushing the limits of the draft zone. And when you get 20, 30 guys riding one after another, after another, after another, that guy who's 20th, barely has to pedal. So just being able to semi-govern when nobody's watching, it's gonna keep people a little more honest, I think.
So the technology. So this goes on the back of the bike, and then one at the front.
Here's where we're on Facebook Live. I'm going to show a picture of this. How's that?
Excellent.
That's technology. Hang on a second. Let me bring it up here. I got to share the screen. So here you go. I'll bring
on
up
what's the accuracy?
The Race Ranger website. Gerry, you're asking things that are over my head. I don't know the accuracy. No, they must have done good research on it to implement it in these races where they have the good money at stake. So
yeah, it's about 10 centimeters from what I've been
pretty
told.
Accurate. Yeah, 10 centimeters. There you go. Right there. So you see the one on the front fork, you get one behind the on the seat post, and that's how you get your readings as to how close you are to the bike in front of you and how close the bike behind you is to you. So I think those monitors communicate with each other.
So are these just for the pro athletes, Jim?
For right now, I believe they're just being implemented in the pro races at the PTO 100 just announced it. I'm not sure if Ironman is on board yet.
Okay. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think anything that helps curb that, because you see these guys running 236 off the bike. There are a lot of times they're coming off the bike having ridden in a group of 10, 12, 15 guys for, 112 miles, and not saying they're fresh, but they're definitely not as beat down as someone who's been riding alone, hint, like myself, for 112 miles. So
fresher.
They're saving some energy and by not officially drafting, but being a little closer than they should be for a majority of the ride. That's what I'm thinking. So I think this is going to help police that a little bit, because people are going to be more aware of what the actual draft zone is. Because right now, to their defense, the rider's defense is all they say in the pro meetings is, watch the little slashes in the road. And if you're closer than the 2 slashes, then you're in the draft zone. So there's no real gauge as to if you're in the draft zone, if you're not in the draft zone. It's all the naked eye and what you think, where you think you are based on where the rider is in front of you, going at, 20, 25, 30 miles an hour at times.
So no longer subjectivity. Now we have, some hard
something that actually is going to tell you, right?
And I presume this is going to show up in an app somewhere or in some race official's tablet or something, where they can see who is, where the infringements, who has infringements. Are you allowed a certain number of infringements or a certain time for an infringement, or is there any further detail that we know about?
I don't know about that yet. I don't know if it's just contained within the bike, or if it's actually communicated somewhere else that somebody can see it.
I think it'd be interesting for us to contact these guys and bring them on a podcast.
Yeah.
Let's chat. Let's dive into this, because if this is successful, then this will make its way into the amateur field, right?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, we're figuring this out on the podcast, but this is what
No,
it is. This isn't scripted. We just do this. We just do this off the cuff. That's how we do
no,
this
it's
podcast.
good because I
Here you
like the.
go. It gives referees visibility of drafting activity remotely. So there you go.
Mhm.
They view drafting data on a tablet. Athletes will no longer know when they are being watched. So that's great. Yep. There you go.
You know, it's not as important so much for the athletes that are finishing in the back 50% of their age group. If we push this out into the age towards the age group athlete now, but the ones who want to do real well and be in the top 10 and qualify for championship races, it would be very important to them that all their competitors are
Yeah.
on equal footing, right?
Yeah, I'm telling you, if you look at data from an Ironman and you see someone who's riding with other riders, not necessarily drafting, just riding with other riders legally, they're still spending, let's say, what do you say when you're drafting in the swim? If you're on someone's feet, you're saving 30% energy. Let's say on the bike, you're saving 10% energy. You're still saving energy you're gonna be able to use when you get onto the run.
Right. There's a lot more energy saved drafting on the bike than there is on the swim, but because of the distance, it may end up being less. But if you're in actually a cycling race where drafting is it's part of the race, there's massive amounts sitting
Oh
on
yeah.
the wheels of your athlete. So
I'm not saying that the guys in these big, grand tours are not working, but a lot of guys can just pick and choose their moments, sit in the peloton, and then sprint for the
right.
last, 1K or whatever it is, and that's their work for the day. So it should be interesting, and that would be good to maybe get that race ranger on the show, somebody who might represent them, and see what they have to say about it. Give us a little more detail, but it
Yeah.
should. I think that self-policing and that policing that they're going to have, where the athletes know that there's always somebody watching, and they're not just looking over their shoulder. Oh, there's a referee coming. I better extend my distance. They know, hey, someone always might be watching this thing, and if I'm red the whole time, I'm out of the race.
Talking about policing and governance and so on, did you see? I'm sure you did. And read all the chatter, and this is more for our local athletes, but I've actually had athletes outside of California, several, and outside of the country contact me because of where we live in Southern California about the Malibu Triathlon
Oh God, the
and
noise.
the Super League, which is now rebranded to Super Tri, I think is the name. I think it's the new name. But the point is, there was a lot of chatter for several weeks in the media outlets about about the permit loss or vying for the permit for the race. So I want to give a little bit of history, at least on some disclosure.
Right. So we're talking about the Zuma. Now it's called the Zuma Beach Triathlon, right? It's called the Zuma Beach Triathlon. It's not Malibu anymore. And then they have the Super Tri Triathlon, which used to own the Malibu Triathlon. So go ahead. You
Yeah,
can
so
talk through it. Yeah.
I'll give the foundation, but I want to give some disclosures. I worked at the very first Malibu Triathlon in the end of the 80s. I was one of the volunteers with us, Malibu Tri Club, or the Team Malibu is what it was known as. We started one of the first triathlon clubs in Los Angeles, and Michael Epstein, who started that race, Malibu Triathlon, came to us, the club, local club in Malibu, and asked if we would volunteer at the race, and we did. So I met him for the first time. So I've known him, but I hadn't seen him for probably 20 years after that or more. And then Brennan Linner, who is the race director of the former Malibu Triathlon, and I'll explain what that means in a moment, but Super League, he works for Super League. He was the race director that put on the last few years of the Malibu Triathlon, and Brennan swims with us at our beach workout. So he's a customer of ours. So we have relationships with both of these. And then in the last 3 years, Tower 26 were a sponsor or the title sponsor to the Hermosa Beach Triathlon, which is run by Michael Epstein, that I just mentioned, who created in the late 80s the Malibu Triathlon. So I also have a personal relationship, or it's a business relationship actually, where we provide a sponsorship and we get something in return for it. So the history, Jim, as I know it, Epstein has put these races on for a number of years. Tower 26 has participated in those races. Many of our athletes go to those races every year, correct?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Both of the races. Yeah.
Yep, this is the largest, to my understanding, the largest race in California.
Yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Up to close to 4 to 5,000 athletes in its heyday, right?
Oh
Saturday
yeah.
and Sunday.
It's an event like no other triathlon I've been to. It's just, you know, you get a big paparazzi pool on the Sunday workout, on the Sunday podium. The paparazzi everywhere. They make a little pit for them, and yeah, it's a pretty cool experience.
And that's because of Epstein created a celebrity division as he initiated the corporate relays, corporate challenge,
Well, I
which,
mean, they were there to see me. I mean, I'm on the podium
of
every year,
course, I
and they're
forgot
just,
about that.
they're
Yes. Yep.
knocking each other over to get to
Well, the
me.
teams
But
are
yeah,
vying. Disney's been calling to have you on the team, and
yeah, yeah.
Amazon wants you on their team, and Netflix. I mean, I get it. I understand.
Mhm.
So the
I wasn't
history of
gonna
the
brag, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So the history of the race, and this all got created by Michael Epstein. We have athletes that go to the race every year, and then Michael Epstein sold the Malibu Triathlon. He was the founder of it from the late 80s, sold the race at some point. And I have asked Michael if he would come on the podcast to talk. So let's hope he does. And I believe I've asked you to ask Brennan if he would come on, and we'd see if he would come on. But I think we should talk to these guys. But here's what's occurred that, as far as we know, Epstein sold the race several years ago. One of the entities that purchased the race subsequently then sold it again to Super League. They had a contract, or they took over or assumed the contract, to my understanding from what I've read, a 3-year contract. That contract was coming up for renewal at some point. And then for whatever reason, as we know, by the way, when they took over the race, Super League took over the race, unfortunately, triathlons throughout the world suffered because the pandemic occurred. So they also missed the opportunity to host a race one year. Then they restarted. And then for whatever reason, which is what I would like to ask both Epstein and Brennan, what caused the Malibu City Council to put the event up for bid? Okay. Did the contract expire? Did it still have term or time left on the contract? Depending on that, and so we go down the pathway of, okay, well, if it expired, then anyone can put in a bid to be the new race director. And if it didn't expire and it still had more time in the contract, well, why? Then it's even worse. Why then did they put a bid up, right? So I think some of these things need to be qualified. And of course, the media hops into this. All the triathlon media started reporting on it, and much of what I read, I found to be lacking substance. And then the ultimate outcome was Michael Epstein, MESP Productions, which is what his company was known as. He formed a new company called, what's its name, Jim? Zuma something?
Zuma Foundation. Zuma Foundation, I believe it is. Yeah.
Zuma Foundation. And they put a bid in for the race. So did Super League put in their bid. And the city council voted for Epstein's bid. And so now he is back putting the race on. So he was a race director, race owner for probably close to 30 years or more. Now he's back putting it on, and Super League, what they've basically done, they own the rights to the race, to the name of the race, the Malibu Triathlon. So Epstein has rebranded the race as now called the Zuma Triathlon, I think, Zuma Beach Triathlon in
Beach
Malibu.
Triathlon. Yeah, exactly.
And then Super League has moved the event. Well, they've lost the location, and it'll now be in Long Beach.
Right.
So there's, to me, what's occurred in the last several months. We've been around. Both of us have been around the sport long enough, and we have some years behind us. There's a lot of smoke. So was there a fire? Most likely. What is the fire? Does it really even matter? It's not going to matter in a year. Most folks will forget about this. Plus, the sport turns over so quickly that there'll be half the people in 2 years would have never even known any of this occurred. But what happened? This is a big thing. What you don't want is precedent where if someone, from a business perspective, we run a business here, from a business perspective, if somebody has a contract with the city for putting events on, and we own an event, as you know, if I have a contract with the city and all of a sudden the city decides that they can nullify my contract at any given time, that's a problem for any race director. It devalues your event. It devalues your business. So I'm interested in a little bit getting into the weeds, because I think this is worthy at a minimum from an administrative standpoint within United States triathlon, if not globally, to get in a bit into the weeds because you don't want this affecting future races.
Yeah,
That
yeah, you don't know how, like you said, the precedent that it's setting, you know, who knows? I don't want to jump to any conclusions. I want our athletes to race and be happy with them
yes,
racing, like you said, on that side of things. But from the race director side, you have to put on that lens. We own the Santa Barbara, Tower 26 not owns, but you guys own the Santa Barbara Triathlon. And, we just got to say, hey, where could this affect us in the future? How could this affect us in the future?
us on
Because
the
it already,
sport in general, right?
totally, yeah.
On race directors are the life and blood, in my opinion, part of the life and blood to the sport. Because without races, that's one of the big motivational carrots for athletes. So I'd like to peel this onion a bit with both of those guys if they're willing. Epstein has agreed to come on. He just hasn't given a date yet. And Brennan, it would be great if he would come on so we could get Super League's perspective. But the problem with this, as you well know, Jim, lawyers tend to manage
Yeah,
their
yeah.
clients,
We
right?
got
So
to,
I'm sure I got to talk to my lawyer and I got to talk to my lawyer and this and that, and before they
yeah.
be willing to come on. Um, but from our perspective, our athletes, we're going to encourage them to go to both events. They're going to go
All
to
right. So
Malibu because it's super close, right? For most of
yep.
our athletes, it's a 15-minute drive. Long Beach, maybe a 45-minute drive, 35 to 45-minute drive. We're going to encourage them to go to Long Beach, 2 events to participate in, and we're going to coach them for both events.
Yeah, there's plenty of time between the two. You got a July race and a September race, or is it August or September? 2 different times a year.
July for, yeah, July and September.
Plenty of time to get ready for both. So yeah, maybe we'll peel onion on that a little bit and get to the bottom of it. But speaking of race directors and race organizations, did you hear that they did get a new CEO for Ironman? Scott DeRue?
Yes.
Scott DeRue is his name. The
Yes.
new CEO of Ironman, named Scott DeRue. He'll take over the CEO of the Ironman Group, joined the company from Equinox, where he was the president. DeRue previously served on Equinox's board before being named president, and previously spent more than 15 years at the University of Michigan, including 5 as the dean of the Stephen M. Ross School of Business. Do you know anything about Scott, or anything about his history, Jer?
I do not, other than Equinox is a big brand in Southern California, obviously. So uh, we've all been to either their clubs or utilized their services at some point. So I don't, but I'm sure, well, not I'm sure. Obviously, the time that it took from the time Andrew Messick announced that he was stepping down uh, for the position to be filled with Scott was, gosh, close to 6 to 8 months. It's quite
Yeah.
a long time. So they obviously did an exhaustive search to come up with their candidate and then make the selection and then have him take office, I believe, last month or in January. I did read some chatter on the Vine, and of course, and it's one of the issues I have with social media that anyone can say or write anything.
Yep.
Their names are not attached to their comments, it's their handles and so forth and so on. So a fair amount of negativity as always. The positive side of that is people feel compelled or impassioned enough to write something. But to me, some of it was quite senseless in that making comments about because he had positions regarding COVID and the positions he took at Equinox, he's not suitable to be a CEO of a company. Well, I mean, every health provider at that time, I mean, the government made a mandate and we had to follow it. So,
Yep.
I mean, some of these comments were, to me, pretty
Yeah,
silly.
and I heard a lot of comments about him not being a triathlete, not doing endurance sport, and blah blah blah. And it's like, really, you don't necessarily you don't have to be a triathlete in order to run a successful business that's based in triathlon. I think I might even argue the point that he's not a triathlete is going to help him run Ironman better than if he were a like an in the weeds triathlete.
Unclouded by history and dogma. And yes, so I would agree with your position. And also time, we need to give everybody an opportunity to do their job and show us the pathway that they're going to take with the brand over the next 12 to 24 months and not
Yeah.
pass judgments before that guy even does anything, needless to say, starts implementing whatever policies or changes he wants to. So, like
Yeah,
anything
I'm
else, give
excited.
chance for
I'm
change.
excited. I'm excited for him to get a fresh look, a fresh take, see what he does with the, with the circuit. Obviously, they're already doing stuff at the pro level with the new series. I'm not sure how much he had to do with that since he's so new, but I'm excited. I want to see where he goes with it and how he thinks differently as opposed to how the races and the brand was run in the past and what he's going to do differently with it going into the future. So it should be an interesting journey that Scott is on now, and maybe we can get him on the show one day.
Well, I was just going to say, with your charisma and contacts, that would be your job.
Let me just tell you, I know some people in some big places, Jerry.
I'm sure you do.
That starts with you. So, but next on the list that I want to talk about is something pretty ridiculous that I find ridiculous is Owen Lloyd. Owen Lloyd of North Carolina, 1650. This isn't triathlon related. This is swimming related. Remember, this is a swimming podcast. But no, it's a
Swimming triathlon podcast. It's a triathlon podcast.
So we can talk. Let's just say we can talk about swimming. All right, because did you see Owen Lloyd? What happened to him at the 1650, the ACC championship?
Yeah, well, he blew up the internet for a while, at least in the swimming community, with his I think it's North Carolina State, or is it North Carolina with?
So let me just refresh everybody. If you haven't heard, Owen Lloyd, senior at North Carolina State University, clinched the 1,615-yard freestyle title at the ACC championships at the end of February, but was promptly stripped of the title after climbing into the adjacent lane to celebrate with teammate Ross Dant, who finished in second place before the other swimmers had touched the wall. The meet's head referee implemented Rule 2, Section 5 of the NCAA rulebook, which states a swimmer who changes lanes during a heat shall be disqualified, leading to Lloyd's disqualification. So he won the race, he won the championship, and was disqualified because he went into the lane of his teammate who was right next to him. Is that correct?
It's correct, but he fell into the lane. So let's sort of back up. It would be great for folks to take a look at this video. We should probably post the video in the show notes. So you won the 1650, which is the equivalent called a mile, although a mile is 1,760 yards, but in NCAA competition in the United States, they swim at the collegiate level the 1650. It's been that way for decades. And he swam fast. I think somewhere in the range of 1437, something like that. 1436. What was it, Jim? Do you have the time handy?
1437.
1437.
Second place was 1439. Was
1439. 2 seconds back.
1437. He won. Second place was 1439.
1439. And they swam next to each other. Raced. I looked at the splits. He made a break at whatever point in the race he did. Got a slight lead. Was able to maintain the lead. Won. Obviously very excited, and did. He was in lane 4, I think. His teammate was in lane 5, 2 seconds finishing behind him. And he did what almost all athletes today are doing in swimming. They climb up onto the lane line. And today in swimming, many lanes are separated by 2 lane lines, and they're very fat, thick lane lines. So they're sturdy. They climb up onto those, they sit on them, and they sort of celebrate with, the fist pump in the air, whatever it might be. And now, mind you, this is a 14.5-minute race, right? So you're at your capacity ceiling for 14.5 minutes. So this would be the equivalent of 5K running, right? So he hops on top, or tries to hop on top of the lane line to sit on it, and he falls over. You could just tell he couldn't even steady himself. He was so fatigued. He falls into his competitor's lane. Now, again, this is about, at this point, 10 or 15 seconds after his competitor has finished. Sort of, rolls into his lane. His competitor, which is his teammate, holds him, gives him a big hug. They congratulate each other. And then in the interim, in these 15 seconds, other athletes are still finishing. And when he gets out of the pool, the referees announce a disqualification because of that rule that you are not allowed to go into any lane of another competitor while the race is still in progress. That's the rule. So there's the rule.
But is the rule written as like while they're swimming, you can't go under the lane line and swim next to the guy? Or is the rule written for something like this? You know what I'm saying? It's meant to be, you can't go under the lane line and like swim stroke for stroke next to the guy like we do at Palisades or El Segundo or up in Santa Barbara, like we do with our athletes when they swim side by side 25s. I don't think it was meant to be in this type of situation. Do you agree?
So there's the letter of the rule and there's a spirit of the rule, right? And the letter of the rule is just what you said. You don't want to affect, impede, hinder, assist, anything. So stay in your lane. That's the rule until the entire field is finished. That's the rule. Now, in the spirit of the rule, the gentleman didn't, he fell into the other lane. It didn't impede. That swimmer, his teammate, was finished. So there's no impeding of anybody's performance. So this is what the whole disruption is about. So your question is about, okay, the letter of the law versus the spirit of what the rule was written for. But Jim, my take on this is you and I probably, if we were the referees at the meet, we would have sat there and chatted about it for 10 seconds. We would have both looked at each other and said, come on, let's just walk over. Let's go to this guy's coach. Let's talk to him. Let's give him a warning. Tell him what the rule, here's the rule, whatever the citation is, rule C 4.6, whatever the heck it is. And tell him and give a warning. I wouldn't have disqualified the gentleman if I were the referee, but it is a rule. And this is an Olympic year. And I suspect that rules are going to be sharpened up, or pencils are going to be sharpened up this year at events by referees where they want all the athletes to fall in line, because what we don't want is an Olympic trials like we had in 1996, where one of our girls who was the leader, world ranked #1 athlete in the world, won the Olympic trials and didn't go to the Olympic Games because she was disqualified in the 400 IM for a rule infringement. So I think this isn't the best. What they're trying to do is have the best interests of the athletes in mind. But when you looked at this video,
this is why I couldn't be a referee, because I'd just be like, you're fine. Yeah, you're okay. It's fine. I couldn't be a cop. Someone's going 75 and a 65, and they're fine. They're okay. I pull the people going for 35 and going 35 and a 45. But this is also why I love ice hockey, right? Because someone breaks a rule, they get their ass beat, right? You high stick somebody in the face. You're not relying on the referee to give a penalty. You're thinking about your teammate who's going to come over and give him a one in the kisser. It's self-policing.
Yeah,
like the race ranger.
And once you watch this video, this young gentleman, senior, you could tell he's so elated that he won. I mean, he's so excited, and he has this very sweet demeanor about him. And then he gets out, and then he's sitting on the side or standing. And when he realizes he gets disqualified, I mean, you could just see everything just drain from him. And then he sits down and he starts sobbing. I mean, this was so emotional and impactful. You could feel his pain. And obviously, there was no intent to break a rule, and the outcome being a disqualification. So he doesn't have a title, ACC title. He doesn't get points for his school. I mean,
this is what I'm thinking here, though. This could be an inside job by what's his name, Owen. Owen, is that his name?
Owen.
You know what? Because NCAA athletes can get paid now, and we're talking a hell of a lot more about Owen now than we would have if he would have actually won the race, and thing would have been fine. So he's going to get a contract with Range Rover. He's going to get a contract with McDonald's. He's going to get a contract with Nike, all because he was disqualified in one race. I think this might be an inside job. I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
Are you an agent? This sounds like an agent thinking.
Hey, I've been hanging out with the right people. Believe me.
Exactly.
Believe me. All right. So one last thing on the list of Potpourri I want to talk about is Kelvin Kiptum. Kelvin Kiptum, who shattered the world record in the men's marathon last year. I think it was 2:01, right? Finishing
2 hours and
2
like
hours.
30 something 35 seconds, I believe.
Oh, right, because he finished right above the 2-hour barrier, right? Finishing tantalizing close to the mythical and once unfathomable 2-hour area. Died in a car crash in Kenya, in Western Kenya. He was 24 years old. His death was announced by the Athletics Kenya, the governing body for track and field in the country. Kiptum's coach, Gervais Hakizimana, was also killed in the crash. He was driving, he veered off the road into a ditch and then hit a large tree. They were killed instantly third person in the car was injured. So this is some horrible news, especially after he just competed in the London Marathon 2023, where he went 2:01:25, second fastest time in history, 16 seconds short of the world record held by Kipchoge of Kenya, 2:01:09. So some very tragic news for this young blossoming athlete here.
Yeah, and what was fascinating? I watched a portion of his 200 race, 2:00:35, and it was amazing. His last 5K, almost the last 5K, because it's 42 kilometers. His 35 to 40 kilometer mark, and I'm taking a quick look at it to make sure I have the exact right number, was 14:01. And his 5K prior to that was 13:51. So he ran a 27:52 almost in the final 10K of that race, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
relative to, it was over 29 minutes was Kipchoge's, if I said his name correctly,
Kipchoge, yep.
Kipchoge's split for his last 10K was 29:13. So you talk about sensible, smart pacing, being able to dish out the right dosage of effort in the beginning and then close really hard. And a young guy, right? Isn't he 23 or 24?
Yeah, 24 time of death. So
This
young,
was,
and and I think like you're right. If you look at I'm just looking at some of his splits from how he executed that race. I could share the screen here if you guys want to see it.
yeah,
But it's
please.
on Olympics.com. But if you look at it, you're right. I mean, you look at that 35K pace, 13:51, sorry, and then the 40K, he's at 14:01, and those are the fastest two of the entire race in the last 10K, right?
Right.
So it just shows, if you want to learn something from the way he was executing, is he went into it with a plan. He raced his race, and that allowed for that finish that he had there right at the 2 hour mark. But tragic news, and he was definitely a talent coming up at the marathon distance. So tough to deal with that one, huh?
Yeah, it's difficult stuff.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just sort of do a quick little 1 minute on for folks to look forward to NCAA women's and men's championship swimming coming up, right? So
Yep.
the third week of March is the women's NCAA swimming championships, and the last week of March, the men's championship race. And you're going to see some fast swimming. Gretchen Walsh, Jim, 45.1 seconds for a 100-yard freestyle.
45.1 second. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Wow.
45 seconds for 100 yards. Most of us are at the
100
50. Most of us are at the 50. She's lapped us. She's finished her 100 and lapped us while we're in the first, now wrapping up the second length of your second 25, right?
Well, speak for
45 seconds.
yourself. She would probably lap me 1.5 times by then.
Crazy. She also broke 20 seconds in a relay, in the 50-yard freestyle relay, the 200 free relay. She was 19.9.
So what's accounting for this speed that she has? I mean, the speed that we.
Well, it's a good question. You're sort of getting on my goat here a little bit. A big portion of this is the 15-meter rule on the water, where NC2As take place in a 25-yard pool. So you'd swim 4 lengths of the pool for a 100 or 2 lengths of the pool for a 50. Gretchen, and there's a 15-meter rule where you can swim 15 meters beneath the surface of the water. So you see these athletes dive in, and then they do these butterfly kicks and come up at the 15-meter mark, and then they do a flip turn, they swim to the wall, then do a flip turn, and then they're on the water for 15 meters again, if they can. Some can't. They can't hold their breath that long, or they haven't trained it appropriately. She is excellent at nailing that 15-meter mark. So she's swimming 15 meters is approximately 16 and a half yards. So she's swimming, Jim, about 8.5 yards each 25 of a 100. So she's swimming 33 yards, 34 yards of 100 yards and doing the rest of it underwater. This is not swimming. I mean, if I'm in charge of rules.
It's execution. She's executing within the parameters of the rules, but
yes.
Yeah, you're right. She's swimming. She's not swimming. You're right. 15 was it? How many arm strokes is she taking in that 15 yards?
And it's another good point. Her mechanics are just outstandingly excellent. I mean, beautiful. Very, very slow starter, slow reaction time relative to everybody else. But the number of strokes in her 50 freestyle for the first 25, I think, was 506 arm strokes and 7 on the second 25. That's it. 12 arm strokes to swim 50 yards. And that's single arm strokes. If cycles, that's 6 cycles, right? To swim 50 yards. So we have this rule that's, for collegiate swimming, that where 2/3 of a race can be swum underwater. Long course, 50-meter
guy
pool,
can't
that's different.
fall over the lane line celebrating. And he gets
Right,
kicked
exactly.
out. Unbelievable.
So,
all right, well, good touch on that. Let's call the potpourri for there. I know our listeners always like these episodes where we touch on a lot of different topics, but we got to get to the workout of the episode before we call it. I know everybody's been sitting on pins and needles waiting for the next workout of the episode. This is one that we coached. What day is today? Coached Tuesday on our local pool swims. It's our A session, first A session of the week. I'll share the screen and show you guys what we got here in our coaching.tower26.com. Remember, we give you all the video, audio, all the educational information as we present the workout to you. And you're doing the same workouts that we are doing here on the pool deck with the Tower 26 swim crew, the open water swim crew that we focus on the foundation phase of training right now. Am I right, Jer?
Right, foundation phase, and we have to be mindful that this is not a session. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, or you're now beginning your season of training, this is not a workout you would do. We started our foundation phase, Jim, as you know, into somewhere around the middle or so, the 10th-ish of January. So we are 60 days into our foundation phase. So many athletes have 2 months of build-up training. We run these 3-week cycles. And we're in our third 3-week cycle. So this is a massive main set for us. Our better A athletes, your podium type athletes did 10 400s. Next level down did 10 350s, and next level down 10 300s, and more of our beginning to triathlon athletes 10 200s to 10 250s, something like that. But it was 10 swims.
So if someone just says, "Hey, I want to come on the Tower 26 coaching and the Tower 26 plan today," they're going to scale this down and not do as much volume. They'll follow the same. They'll follow the same parameters of the workout, but you're not going to go 4,000 plus in the workout. You're going to scale it down to 2,500, and then you build up from there.
Correct. And the way we executed this was we took about a minute break in between each one of these reps. This morning, I coached this workout this morning. We were taking a bit more rest than a minute. But we did these, Jim, this is about pacing and effort management. We did these progressing effort 1 through 4. So we started off at about 70% effort on number 1, 75% on number 2, 80% on number 3, 85% on number 4. So think of this as you've got the reins in and your foot on the brakes on the first one. Then you start releasing the reins a bit on the second one. You release more on the third one. You put the accelerator on the fourth one. And you had a pretty high aerobic output by your fourth one. And then we maintained that effort on numbers 5, 6, and 7. So from number 4 to 7, you are pressing at 85% of maximum heart rate for those 4. We then recovered on 8 and 9. We did those easy recovery. And then we came back on number 10 and did that as a fast one.
Well, especially swimmers who are newer to swimming, and a lot of adult onset swimmers, they don't realize that we have to, and we bring this up on this podcast a lot, is we have to work different efforts, right? If you take out number 1, 2, and 3 as hard as you can, you're going to have a really tough time getting through 4 to 10. But if we pace it out accordingly, and you really know those different efforts, and easy is easy, so when we have to go hard, you have money in the bank to use when you got to go hard. It makes it attainable. But you got to realize that a lot of times your easy isn't easy enough. So you got to think it through and really go into it and execute within the parameters of the workout. Because if you look at the full workout, I just trimmed it down so we could see the details of the workout. We have the ability to toggle it here. You see all these different educational pieces, and it talks about technique, it talks about pacing, talks about all the stuff that you'd want to know to execute this type of workout correctly. So a lot of good educational content within that. And then Emily does the audio file prior to each workout for you guys to listen to and get some reminders as you go in and execute that workout. So coaching.tower26.com, join into that plan, and you will be race ready come your open water swim. Questions of the episode. Remember, you guys can write contact@tower26.com to ask questions. I'm actually going to go to Facebook Live for a question. We got a question from Jacqueline Bildeau, who's one of our athletes. She asked the question, on the Race Ranger, how do you know if you get a drafting penalty if you're not being flagged down? So go ahead, Jer.
Miss J, that's what we call her. Miss J.
That's it.
Well, how do you know you get a penalty? There is a signal, I believe.
So that's the thing. That's the thing about it. It gives you lights. You can see the light. The rider can see the lights. If it's orange, you're fine. If it's blue, you're fine. If it's red, you're in the draft zone, right? And that's being communicated to the official to know, hey, this guy is in the draft zone. Now, I don't know if there's any type of buffer. If they give you a second buffer, that's what we're gonna have to maybe talk to Race Ranger about. But I think it's a better system than USA Triathlon has, who doesn't have, they don't tell you as you're getting a penalty. Like USA Triathlon races don't tell you, just after the fact, they add penalty time to your finish time, right? And you go back and you say, what happened to my finish time? Oh, you got a penalty for this or that or whatever it may be. This, at least, hey, I got in the red like 15 times. I'm probably going to get a penalty. I was a little too close, but that'd be something to clarify and talk to the people from Race Ranger about.
I would think there's probably some signal built into, because this has got to run through the referee first. They're going to see it. They're then going to make a decision. They'll either dispatch a motorcycle or whatever it may be to follow that athlete or athletes, unseat, and then decide what to do at that point. And let's make the assumption that Ms. J is saying, what if the athlete is disqualified? I would think there's some real-time signaling that's taking place for that athlete. Maybe something on the side of the road that notifies them with their race number, whatever it is. There's got to be some signaling, and then a tent to go to and do serve your penalty.
That's it. Well, I guess they'll all figure out that in time, and I'm sure they'll have it dialed in before they actually start implementing all this stuff into the races. But good question. Thanks for partaking in that, Jack. But Jared, what are we going to talk about on the next episode of this podcast?
Well, like we mentioned in some prior podcasts, we have a handful, Jim, of interviewers. I guess we'll be interviewing them, guests. To have on.
All right. Well, we look forward to it. Remember, guys, if you have questions for the podcast, be answered on air. Go to write us at contact@tower26.com. Go to coaching.tower26.com to subscribe to our Zoom subscription plan. And we appreciate all you guys for listening, tuning in. Jerry, any last words from you?
Good to do this again with you. It's been a few weeks since you've done it. I'm glad you're back on. You always keep things moving along. I like it.
I love it. It's like I'm home. So, all right. Till next time, for Jerry Rodriguez, Jim Binsky, the Tower 26 Be Race Ready podcast. Thanks for joining, guys.